Mr. Chairman. I want to follow up on the money. We had a hearing last week and we talked about that, but I want to also talk about the connection between the IRGC and the money trail. I'm very concerned about, and by the way, we had a question earlier, is the revolution dead? Well, by definition, the IRGC, it's in their name. I mean, their existence depends on this being a continued exportable revolution, in my opinion. But the point that the IRGC, just like the PLA years ago, used to have a significant portion of China's economy. IRGC has up to 20 to 30% of Iran's economy, which means they have an ongoing source of revenue to export and support terrorism around the world. And we know from the Treasury Department's own report of weapons of mass destruction support for terrorism, Hezbollah, Bashar al-Assad, militia, the Shiite militias just in Iraq that we know since 2005 have actually killed more than 500 U.S. soldiers. The Houthi rebels, I mean, the list goes on and on. Boko Haram, I mean, all across the entire region, we know the IRGC plays an important role. The question is how can we, in a post-deal environment, use our economic sanctioning ability and our financial ability to get at the flow of money through the IRGC to these terrorists. And the reason I'm asking that is that the money flow, Mr. McInnes, I don't disagree with you, but there's still money to come. We're opening up economic sanctions, releasing sanctions. We know they've got assets in other countries. So this money flow is not just a one-time deal. The $33 billion in cash and gold, yeah, they'll get a bump this year. But they're going to continue to get increased availability of cash or spendable money into their nefarious activities. So my question to both of you is, how would you advise the next administration with the IRGC and the money flows and the releasing of sanctions and the opening up of business over there? What's our role? How can we play a hindrance? How can we hinder their ability to further support terrorism around the world?
Well, I think what you get to, and you're absolutely right that this one-time bump is a one-time event but they'll certainly continue on. In thinking about the last question, I think what we're looking for is how do you create an Iran that is certainly going to go through a degree of economic expansion over the next few years, at least according to most estimates. But how do you create a recession in the IRGC's economy? How do you separate that out?
I'm sorry to interrupt, but even before they have an economic renaissance, just releasing their assets with other countries means there's a flow of cash that's coming to them immediately, independent of whether their economy grows. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. And the issue, I think, one of the things, and you're right to also bring up the PLA, because I actually, prior to doing Middle East for a number of years, I actually worked on China's security issues and familiar with the whole PLA business model concerns. And in that process of getting the PLA out of business, Iran may at some point in time go through the same process because they were running into some of the same problems that China did in that. But I think that the Iranians, there's a recognition that over time, it is going to become a problem for the IRGC to play if it's going to actually have this type of dynamic economy that integrates with the rest of the world. The IRGC eventually is going to have to take probably a lesser role. But I think that the key for that is whether, the problem with the nuclear deal that many of us talk about, there's many problems with it, but one of the biggest problems is that, it's front-loaded to Iran's favor. In that they get most of the benefits up front. We get the benefits if they actually don't build a bomb at the end, throughout the entire period. But part of the reason what you can change that equation is if the front loading doesn't actually happen at all at the front, where the business climate is not completely favorable at the beginning, and that's where you change this dynamic that happened in the last 12 months or so, where we go out there and we're encouraging the international community to invest in Iran, and we relax the issues of using dollars, using dollars for business transactions for foreign companies. We do all these things to make it easier to invest in Iran. We make it so it's not so problematic if a foreign company, a U.S. company with a foreign subsidiary does business with guys that have, and that company has IRGC guys in the back room or somewhere on their corporate board. We've relaxed a lot of those rules recently. all those rules with the incoming administration or with rules coming from this body, some of that stuff can be reversed. You can change the front loading. You can make it more conditional, that business climate and that money flow, and particularly and place the burden back on Iranian business, that the IRGC's role and the money the IRGC business and businesses related to the IRGC, or that they become a business, burden. That is something you can change that equation, I believe, and focus on that, and create and make those businesses recessionary, and so I think that is something that could be looked at and focused on.
I'm sorry, Mr. Chairman, I'm out of time, but could I ask your forbearance and ask Ms. Dalton to respond to
Absolutely.
that quick? I'm sorry, Ms. Dalton.
Thank you very much. I think that in addition to what Mr. McInnes laid out, harnessing the coalition that was used to broker the JCPOA on approach to Iran going forward is going to be of paramount importance. The reality is there are limits to what the United States can do directly vis-a-vis the IRGC, but leveraging the broader coalition of P5+1, perhaps even some Asian allies and partners would be a broader and more holistic approach to addressing this problem set. And I think that another dimension of this could be thinking of creative ways to offset the IRGC over the long term, and put something a little bit provocative on the table that was in my written testimony and would be welcome further discussion on it. But something my colleagues and I have been discussing is over the long term, at the end of the JCPOA period in 2020, the sanctions on an international ban on conventional arms sales to Iran will be lifted. Is there a future scenario in which...
That's 5 years, right?
Yes, in 2020.
Right.
Is there a future scenario in which Iran is able to divert funds to its conventional arms capability and away from the IRGC? As Matt has pointed out, the IRGC is front and center to the ideological ambitions of the regime. But in terms of Iran's pragmatic interests in the region, its power projection, its desire to have a political and strategic role in the region, that often can come from a conventional capability. So, it's an issue in which the United States perhaps doesn't want to be forward-leaning on, but is it possible for the United States to tacitly allow for, over time, the development of Iran's conventional capability to offset Iranian investments in the IRGC, which have historically run up against and threatened the interests of the United States and its allies and partners?
Yeah. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Senator Sheen.